Hello chess friends, did you know that in 1977, former world champion Bobby Fischer played a 3-game match with a computer program called the Greenblatt program in Cambridge, Massachusetts? Yeah, apparently he wasn't as missing as a lot of people have made him out to be, and for the right price, against an opponent that he probably figured he couldn't lose to, he could still be persuaded to play. So that's what happened, leaving us with 3 games, which are among the earliest examples of man versus machine in the game of chess. So we're going to look at one of the most interesting of these games now. Fischer had the white pieces, and he played his signature move e4. The computer responded e5, and now Fischer goes for the king's gambit. I think he instinctively knows that computers are probably going to be materialistic and are going to try to hang on to extra material. After e takes f4, this opening is not favored at the highest level because the activity that white gets as a result of this pawn sacrifice is not really justified if black plays correctly. But Fischer knows how sharp this opening is and how quickly black can get into trouble if he doesn't play correctly. And here Fischer plays the move bishop to c4. Knight f3 is a little more common here because it protects against a possible queen to h4 check. Fischer's not really worried about that variation though, because the king in that case would go to f1, and then knight f3 would come shortly with an attack on the queen, so it would come with tempo. But the computer doesn't play queen to h4 here, it goes for d5, which I think is probably a book move. It was probably programmed into the computer because the fact that it's giving the pawn right back, offering the bishop the pawn on d5, I don't think is consistent with what it does later on in the game, where it dubiously tries to hang on to an extra pawn, as you'll see. The point of playing this d5 move and allowing the bishop to capture it is that now knight to f6, it comes with an attack on the bishop. So white has a couple of options here. You can back up with the bishop, but now you're just losing a move. The whole point to this king's gambit is to get quick development, to compensate for the pawn you gave up. So that's not really consistent with the spirit of this opening. Bobby Fischer plays the best move here, knight to c3, just looking to replace the bishop in the center with the knight if it's captured by the knight on f6. This is a nice option for black to have. Otherwise, e5 could possibly kick that knight away from its post on f6 at some point if the bishop were still on c4. But here it's not going to happen because you're going to lose your bishop. It's one of the reasons why black sacked the pawn, just to get the bishop to d5. So here the computer plays another book move. He plays bishop to b4, just attacking one of the pieces that's defending white's center. And I think the computer is probably still in its book. Bobby Fischer plays knight to f3, just getting ready to castle. And here the computer castles. I wonder if the computer was thinking on its own at this point. Did it consider the following line? This is an interesting line here where you can take on c3, and after d takes c3, you play c6, driving the bishop back. Queen takes d1, king takes d1, and then you can grab the pawn on e4. Looks a little dangerous because what are you doing after this? The knight's pinned to the king. Well, you can actually defend here with bishop to f5. If this knight moves, you go to h4 here, attacking the bishop, well, there's just bishop g4 check. Then your only reasonable move is just to put the knight right back. So this is a known line for black. It seems that it is most likely to end in a draw with correct play from both sides. But the computer just castles, very possibly a book move. Bobby does the same. Now here the computer plays a very good move. It takes out the bishop. It seems that the most popular book line is c6, bishop b3, and then taking here, 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 which is similar to what we saw, except the black king is castled in this case, so that knight's not going to get pinned. That's a popular line. Stockfish actually thinks that favors white. And it likes the move that the computer made against Bobby Fischer. Knight takes d5. Fischer takes with the knight, attacking the bishop. Now this line is good for black, but black only has one good follow-up, and the computer does not find it. See if you can find the best move for black in this position. It's not easy. If you can find it, consider yourself a strong player. The correct move is f5. But wait a minute, I thought the bishop was hanging. Yes, but after knight takes b4, f takes e4, once this knight moves, let's say knight e1, queen d4 check, gets the piece back. So that is the best way for black to play. Any other move is losing according to Stockfish. And so at this point the computer plays bishop to d6. which just allows Bobby to get everything he wants. He plays d4. He's got the nice big center. He can play e5 in a minute, kicking that bishop. He can take the pawn and actually be up in material. So white has a winning position here, but after the computer's next move, it's just completely over. It gets a little bit too materialistic and plays g5. Horribly weakening the king just to try to hang on to this pawn. And in this position, Fischer finds the most decisive continuation. Take a minute, see if you can find white's best move. The most decisive move here is knight takes g5. This is the kind of position where, as white, you know you're winning. And I've had these kinds of positions against computer programs on lower levels or weak programs before, and it can be frustrating because it's not always easy to find the most decisive move. A lot of times it will require a sacrifice like this. If I had this position, I'd probably play something like e5, driving the bishop back, and then maybe take the bishop, maybe play queen d3, and white's still better. But after Bobby's move, knight takes g5, the computer grabs the knight, doesn't really have anything better, but now Bobby continues with e5, attacking the bishop, which there's no good way to save. It doesn't have any safe square out this way. It can only really try to go to e7 defended by the queen. But if bishop e7 is played right here, there's just bishop takes f4, and now the queen can only go to h4 to keep trying to defend the bishop, but then there's g3. All these squares are covered. Once the queen moves to safety, that bishop is going to fall with check. So the computer, it throws in this bishop h3 desperado, threatening a checkmate in one move, which Bobby has a very easy way to deal with, rook to f2, and all black's problems are still there. This bishop is going to be lost. So the computer at this point realizes that there's no saving that bishop, so it says, hey, I'll grab a pawn. D takes e5. Now this pawn's still under attack. It's pinned. There's the idea of knight takes c7, grabbing that rook, which can't escape. So for whatever reason, the computer decides to play c6, giving that knight a kick, which Bobby could just jump into c7 and win the exchange, but he's going to play the best move here. He's going to play bishop takes f4. He says, I'm not worried about winning an exchange. I'm going for checkmate. Look at your king. Wide open. So the computer moves the queen to g7, trying to keep some defense around the king side, though after knight to f6 check by Bobby, king to h8, queen to h5, dual threats of taking out the bishop. There's also bishop h6, which will win the rook because this queen has nowhere to go where she can maintain defense of that rook. So the computer here says, okay, bishop or rook, I think I'll move my rook and let you take my bishop instead. And after Bobby captures the bishop, it plays knight to a6, connecting the rooks. But everything's hopeless now because after rook to f3, rook g3 is coming. How is the queen going to maintain defense of h7? Well, the computer comes up with queen to g6, which is a reasonable try. There is the idea, after queen takes c2, of rook d1 check. So Bobby just stops that whole idea with rook to c1. But he could have actually got away with playing rook g3 and allowing queen takes c2, because after queen h6, you can even get away with allowing black to play rook d1 check, because after rook takes, queen takes, incredibly, the king can move towards the queen. If black tries endless check, after king e1, queen b1, there's bishop c1. Black has run out of checks. And how are you stopping checkmate? You can only start doing crazy things, like giving up the queen in some way. So Fischer could have got away with that, but he plays a very sensible move, rook to c1, just not allowing any hint of counterplay. And now rook g3 is just going to be devastating. The computer plays king to g7. For whatever reason, I don't know, Stockfish says the better thing to do is to play rook to g8, just for some extra coverage of these squares, maybe rook g7, I don't know. But after king g7, rook g3, black's best move would be h5, that's a mate in 8, or running with the king, that's going to be a mate in 7. But for some reason, I don't know if it was a glitch or what, the computer program Bobby was playing against, it plays rook to h8, and I'll give you a couple seconds to find Bobby's move here. There's two possibilities. Bishop h6 is a checkmate in 1, and what Bobby played is also checkmate in 1. So I don't know why the computer allowed him to do that. If it was a glitch, you would think that it would not miss checkmates in one move, despite the fact that it was a very primitive program compared to what we have nowadays. Who knows? But I thought this was a very interesting game. A good example of Bobby demonstrating how to take down a player that's much weaker than you by playing these sharp openings. And he had actually played the exact moves of this game before, up to move 7. After he castled, in 1964 he played a simul where his opponent played bishop takes c3, and he played d takes c3, as opposed to the computer program, which played the better move, knight takes d5. So it seems that Fischer, in order to achieve a completely winning position with white, only had to play one move that he hadn't played before, or at least that we don't have a record of him playing before, and that was this knight takes d5 move. After which black needed to play f5, but instead played bishop d6, and at this point, according to Stockfish, Bobby has a completely winning position. So I hope you enjoyed that. Please subscribe to the channel. Let me know if you enjoyed this game, because there are 2 other games from the same match. Bobby Fischer versus the Greenblatt program, which I might cover in the future if you guys want. So thanks for watching. Stay tuned.